And so I'm actually honored here today. This is very interesting because we got a rattler and a wildcat sitting up here.
I just thought about that. Like,
up here today.
What are we doing right now?
But it's okay. I love my HBCUs,
Yes.
so I'm happy to hear that you're actually in the road to Jackson State as well. So that's pretty exciting. So I really want to hop on this book here because I'm a big historian,
Yes.
and this is a topic that a lot of people don't know about. We don't share that to today's generations, as well as just people who may have grown up here because of segregation. They don't know about the opposite side of the tracks, for example. So before we jump into our list of questions, I have my own kind of questions I want to get out of you. So I really want to start off with if you could tell us a little bit about the book in general.
Okay.
And, let's say what led you to write and dive into this area of research, and then some background on what it took to make the book.
Okay. Well, thank you. And it's, I truly have a passion for history. Of course, Florida, my home state, and starting in 2003 when I attended Michigan State University, I did a lot of research on historical sites and homes and the Malcolm X home site. And so that was really the beginnings of this journey of studying historical historical sites, and then adding Florida, it just made sense. And so during the pandemic, I reached out to Arcadia Publishing and pitched the idea of covering a book about historical homes across the country. And of course, they produce books, and they said, well, which state? And I was like, well, of course, Florida. It's a connection. It's my home state. And also the research that I've done over the years, Florida had a large amount of historical homes or sites that were, open or functioning. And so I went forward and, went through the process, which I know you're familiar with. I had several photos, in my possession already, and then had to take the journey of, in the middle of the pandemic, not able to come to Florida, to just go through archives, historical, sites and homes that are open, and libraries all over the country, and acquired pictures. And I think the book has about 150 photos, some from the Library of Congress, some from individuals that I met in Miami that gave me photos or allowed me to use them, and just an array of photos that cover houses in Florida, from wealthy people to barely people that were free from slavery, and just everyday individuals that, had homes that really had historical significance. So, yes. So really just a passion project. I say one of my children, I have 3 children, so I feel like this is my 4th baby.
And that's great. And Jada is being modest when it comes to publishing a book. I can tell you, like with Arcadia, because I've published with them before, those 150 pictures, they have to be scanned at a certain DPI. So they have to be this clear, like 300 DPI. And that's basically like a resolution picture size for people who may not understand. But there's a lot that really goes into that research effort. It's more than just reading books. It's a lot of photo scanning and reaching out to people across the country. And I just want to mention, like, I'm so happy to see Jada's family here as well, and husband and 3 kids, like right up in here in the front supporting. So I'm going to kind of start jumping into these questions. We'll run until we get to 12:40, and then we'll take some questions from the public as well. So the first thing I want to know is, in general, you've written about homes, but there are individuals that own those homes. And many of those individuals were wealthy African Americans during a point of Jim Crow. This is prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. What types of businesses and like occupations were some of these wealthy individuals involved in that you highlighted in the book?
Well, a lot of different professions. What really surprised me: education, real estate, insurance. I mean, insurance was just huge back then because, of course, during that time, like you said, before Jim Crow, black individuals were not able to get policies from white insurance companies. And so, for instance, A.L. Lewis out of here in Jacksonville, him and other colleagues started the Afro-American Life Insurance Company. They were successful because all the business came to them. And he also owned a country club here. So they really just tapped into those things, those resources that people, weren't able to have access to. Black people weren't able to have access to. So even neighborhoods, real estate. D.A. Dorsey in Miami, he was working for the railroad company Henry Flagler owned, and decided, I'm going to buy tracts of land in Overtown. And those tracts of land, it's been recorded, he spent about $25. He constructed and designed those areas, built homes, and individuals purchased those homes. So he was very committed to the area and the neighborhoods so that blacks had other opportunities, just, like white people had at that time.
And it's very interesting that you mentioned A.L. Lewis, for example. So we are in the Dallas Graham Library. For those of you who may not be familiar with this neighborhood, this is Durkeeville, and Durkee Gardens is now on the National Register Historic District. Actually, it's at Jacksonville's first African-American historic district in the city. But of interesting note, you mentioned people couldn't get insurance and things of that nature, and that's part of this legacy of redlining. This neighborhood here was largely built and financed by the African American life insurance company that A.L. Lewis is one of those 7 founders. So now that we've kind of mentioned A.L. Lewis and Durkeeville, can you share some of the examples from the Jacksonville area and the Durkeeville area that are covered in the book?
Well, I tapped into Durkeeville in the Sugar Hill area, which I know you're familiar with. It's a wonderful area. As a little girl, I used to drive over to the Sugar Hill area. And just a quick note, I used to come into the Dallas Graham Library as a kid. I was telling my oldest, Mommy used to come in here when she was 12. My grandmother actually used to bring me in this very room for meetings with the Bethune Circle, #1, which raised money for Bethune-Cookman and really was the beginning of me going to Bethune-Cookman. So it's a full circle moment because that was, 1980s or something, so to be back in this room. But that, the community was where my grandmother spent a lot of time, and we frequent this area. But what I was fascinated to find out was the Sugar Hill area was home to many prominent black people, doctors. Bishop Henry Tooks, who was a chancellor at Waters College, him and his wife Maggie built a home in the 1930s. That home is still here. We just passed it coming here today, and it's owned by my sorority members, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And I remember driving past that home like, I can't wait to be an AKA and go into it. And so the fact that I was able to research and find this historical photo of the house has just brought joy to me. Another house I want to mention is A.L. Lewis. He had a home in Sugar Hill, which unfortunately was demolished, but also, of course, in American Beach. And so all these prominent blacks lived in this area, which is really, really amazing. And I didn't know, and it's until later on in discovering some of your work and doing this research, how many prominent blacks were in the area.
That's a good one. So Sugar Hill, for those of you who may not know where that's at, if you're familiar with the location of UF Health Jacksonville, just on the other side of Interstate 95, that area was Sugar Hill. And as Sugar Hill filled out, Durkeeville was pretty much the extension of that. So Sugar Hill developed around the 1920s, 1930s. Durkeeville, 1940s. Interstate 95 built through Sugar Hill, over Sugar Hill in the 1950s. UF Health Jacks expands over the rest of the neighborhood pretty much in the 60s and 70s. You mentioned American Beach, so I'm going to jump around here on the questions. So your book also covers several homes that were located or associated with historic Black beach resorts and communities throughout the state. Can you talk about a few of them? I know you mentioned American Beach. So
Yes, American Beach was, started. A.L. Lewis was at the time president of the insurance company, and he urged the pension arm of the insurance company, hey, we should buy some property down, at American Beach, which of course they named American Beach, because again, Blacks were not able to just go to the beach, Jacksonville Beach or whatever. And so they bought this tract of land, and and I think there is a property, you probably know, motel there, homes. A.L. Lewis bought the first house that was there. And so just a place for Blacks to go. And then there's Butler Beach. Frank Butler, who was out of St. Augustine, Florida, came to the area, owned a market and a real estate firm, and decided he was going to buy property in Lincolnville, the area in St. Augustine. And then he said, oh, well, let me open a beach as well. And so it's a tract of land on Anastasia Island called Butler Beach after him. And there were bathhouses, places where, Blacks could come and relax. And that was the only tract of land for Blacks to be able to relax between Daytona and Jacksonville. So just a place, all these individuals just saw the need and really filled that gap,
So, covering that general area, I know that, we're in Jacksonville, and American Beach is in Nassau County. It's not that far away. St. Augustine and Butler Beach isn't that far away. Bethune Beach is like an hour away, south of here. Because that general area is only, let's say, this period of time that we're covering here is less than 50 years, pretty much. It appears that many of the property owners within the book actually knew each other and were affiliated with each other. So what are some of the organizations and the philanthropic opportunities that they would have been associated together, that brought them together, that kind of expanded this network throughout the state?
So Mary McLeod Bethune, of course, founder of Bethune-Cookman, she knew everybody. And so she was very well acquainted with Garfield Rogers out of Tampa, Florida. And he owned several businesses, housing, real estate, and also Central Life Insurance Company. Again, insurance. And so he was president for a while, and then Dr. Bethune became president for a while. Helping each other, investing into one another. When she started Bethune Beach out of an incident that happened with some of her students trying to go to the beach in Daytona, they were refused, and she said, "Oh no, we're going to open our own beach." And so she went across the state to people that she knew, George Ingram, also Garfield Rogers, and said, "Hey, we need to invest into this and open our own beach." And so they became acquainted with each other out of a need, an opportunity to give back to their community. And that's what I love about the individuals that I study. No one ever just made money and just kept it for themselves. They were always working together in order to make sure there was a better life for Blacks.
So Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, that's very interesting that she was once the president of Central Life, because she was also a shareholder of African American Life, which A.L. Lewis was the longtime president here. And she also visited American Beach and loved Duck's Ocean View, the hotel on there. But so my family's from Central Florida, and you mentioned Tampa, and Central Life was based in what was the Scrub back in the day, which was Tampa's version of, say, Jacksonville's La Villa or Jacksonville's out east or the east side, they feel at Randolph Boulevard. So from a Tampa perspective, Central Avenue in the Scrub was really a anchor to a bustling community. Can you tell us a little more about that area and some of the businesses that were in that community?
So there was over 100 businesses that have been documented that were owned by Blacks in the area. Again, they were not able to just go to the store in downtown. And so they created this hub of hair salons, dry cleaners, beauty salons, and even entertainment centers. I even read that Ray Charles was staying in a rooming house in that area and wrote one of his songs. And so now, unfortunately, just like it's happened in Sugar Hill, a freeway has come through that area, and it's not there. One of the first things I did when I relocated here to Florida in the Tampa area is go to that area. And there is a park there that has photos and a reflection of the area, that it was. But it was a very popular, thriving center for life, for just everyday, and also entertainment.
And, I was just there recently, probably like a month or so ago, and I also had a chance to sit on the state's panel review for the African American History and Heritage Grants. And so the Jackson Rooming House, which is in the Scrub, it was actually awarded some money. So some of those rooming houses that people like, Ray Charles, when he left places like Jacksonville, because Ray Charles was here before he went to Tampa, actually kind of rolled through this. It was good to see that. Even though a lot has been torn down, the park you mentioned, it pays homage to that past, and there's a few structures that they are trying, to save there. So I want to jump around the state again, since we're down in Central Florida now, and then we're gonna go to Sarasota, which is probably about an hour south of Tampa. So there was an area in Sarasota that was also settled by African Americans and was very African Americans were very influential in that development of that area. So can you share about some information about some of the people there and what they contributed to that area?
Sure. So Lewis and Irene Colson. Lewis was a former slave, had some money, and decided, I'm going to invest into this community. So it was an area called Newton, which it's thriving right now. They're revitalizing. And he bought tracts of land. And actually, one of the first things he did was there was a church that wanted to get started. I believe it was called Bethlehem Baptist. He sold the land to them for $1. And they were able to open the first Black church in Sarasota. These people just came here and just were dedicated to the community. They wanted to make sure there were plenty of opportunities, plenty of places for us to not only live, but worship, to relax, to go to the beach, to go to the store, to get the hair done, everything. And so I just admire them, and they did it from as far as north, all the way down, to Sarasota, and even down to Miami.
All right. So, yeah, and I know a lot of, why I went to HBCU, why, I also try to work in the community is because of a lot of what the legacy, and I see that in you as well, with the legacy of our generations and our ancestors are being breathed through, and you continue with that. And I see it in your family as well. You mentioned some of these, the people, individuals that really looked out for the community, even though, they put in their time, they made their wealth. These were people who would have been the daughters, the sons, the grandkids of people who were once enslaved in this area. Mm-hmm. But they also gave back to the community and looked out for that community. So I know you shared some information with us already, but you just mentioned Miami, so I'm gonna go there now. So can you share a little bit about someone who really gave to that Miami community, and even if anybody else in South Florida? I know you mentioned Dorsey, so most people won't know who Dorsey is.
Yeah.
So you can tell us a little bit about D.A. Dorsey.
Yes. So D.A. Dorsey, like I said, he worked on the railroad. And thought this was a good idea to buy these tracts of land, and he did, and he designed, those different areas for Blacks to be able to have homes. Not only that, but he also bought what we know today as Millionaire Island or Fisher Island. It was a Black beach before it was Millionaire Island. He owned it and eventually had to sell it. So a lot of people don't know that, and I just discovered, I was like, wow, what's Millionaire Island now was owned by Blacks. So amazing. And then there was Stirrup. There's a Stirrup house there. He was another resident from the Bahamas that came over to Miami to work and own property. The property that he used to own is now in the hands of the family, and they have turned it into a bed and breakfast, so you actually can go down and stay in the house. So again, individuals just were so dedicated to the community and wanted to make sure there were plenty of opportunities to live and have fun.
Stirrup, being Afro-Bahamian, that's such a, important part of Miami's history. I know a little bit of Miami too. My grandma stayed in Overtown. Her house was taken for 95.
Okay.
So, know a lot about that. And even just the connections, again, I know you mentioned it earlier, how everyone tended to be peers of one another. They looked out for the community. So D.A. Dorsey was also a shareholder in the African American Life Insurance Company.
Such a strong network. They really just worked together. They weren't fighting. They just said, let's do this together. And I love the fact that they didn't say, well, I'm in Miami, so I'm not going to do anything. No, all across the state, they just worked together.
And it's just wonderful. So I hope people are hearing that collaboration, the importance of collaboration. So I want to hop back to the homes. What is one of the oldest homes that was owned by a Black person in Florida that you covered in the book?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's actually the first house in the book. It was owned by a woman named Julie Patton, who was a free woman of color, which was very rare. It was 1800s the house was built. And it's still standing today in Pensacola. And it was built in the style of this Creole style, Louisiana kind of French quarters, in the design of a salt box. And so there's no sidewalk. But it's really unique because I didn't know that this woman owned the house, and so as soon as I found that photo, I was like, I have to get it. And as you said, it's very difficult to get a high resolution photo, something so much older, and Arcadia really pushes for you to have historical photos. So when I found that photo, I was like, this has to be in the book as the first photo in the book, and also owned by a woman that was free.
So before I get back to the questions, now that you just mentioned you finding that photo, can you go in a little more detail of what it really took to find those photos?
That's because and I emailed you, and it's like, hey, help me.
We may have more expiring writers in the crowd here.
Yes. So. Really, and it's how I emailed you. I reached out to libraries, to archives, museums. I went online and did thorough research to find those photos. And like you said, you can't just pull a photo off of Wikipedia. You have to get permission. I had to purchase some of the photos because they're in historical societies that, they make their money from photo usage. Some places I was able to have, to be able to use them with no cost. But it's a tedious process. So I started in March of 2020, and I was finished with the book in November of 2020. And so I did not set foot in Florida one time. I was living in Texas at the time, and I literally did everything after virtual school with my kids. Sometimes in the middle of virtual school, calling, talking to individuals. Even a museum in Miami connected me to a woman who had loads of photos from the Miami area, and having to navigate, she had to trust me to say, I'll let you use these photos. And I gained her trust. Now, she's never seen me. She doesn't know. I just said, hey, I got your information. And they say they have some photos. So it's difficult because you have to find, as 150 photos at least. High resolution, meaning you can't just, do what you got to get really good photos because it's high quality.
Can't use a cell phone.
No, You cannot use your cell phone. But it was very interesting to see and to learn the history, really, of Black Floridians. I had no clue. I mean, I grew up here in Jacksonville in Grand Park. I knew my city had a lot of history, but I didn't really understand or conceptualize it until I finished this book.
Yeah, so some of the places where you can find historic images if you want to find some. Library of Congress is always a good location. Florida Memory out of Tallahassee is great. You got the Ritz, which is here in town if you're looking for African American history. The Durkeeville Historical Society, which is like 2 blocks up the street here. The Jacksonville Historical Society as well. And then I would say, like, if you're looking for local stuff, the City of Jacksonville's the public library, Special Collections Department at the main branch on the 4th floor, great location. And then UNF and the Edward Waters also are good resources as well.
And
So
Ennis Davis has some. He's being modest. He runs the Jackson Mag, which when I started doing research, that's when I saw how all the research that he had done and was able to find, photos from all those places he listed as well.
So you've mentioned a ton of communities across the state. We've heard Miami, we've heard Jacksonville, Tampa, Sarasota, Daytona, St. Augustine. And many of these wealthy individuals were involved in insurance. A lot of that insurance started off as burial insurance because, African Americans didn't have access to that and couldn't afford that 100 years ago. And that also kind of brings this thing about, kind of medical and healthcare and physical well-being. But this is also segregation. The area is a period of segregation. And, Black people just going to walk into any hospital across the state.
They couldn't.
So with that being said, there were several Black hospitals across the state where that's where African Americans could basically only receive health care. Can you share some information about a few that came about as you wrote this book?
Yes. So a hospital that I didn't know about was in Gainesville, Florida. A woman by the name of Jeannie Rowe, who was a nurse, decided, I'm going to turn my house into a hospital. And so she ran this makeshift hospital out of her house for several years. And I was able to locate a photo of that house, which is really remarkable, and it's in the book. Another hospital here, Brewster Hospital. Of course, everyone knows my grandmother actually worked at Brewster Hospital. And so that hospital was available, of course, for Blacks. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the original sites is still here and getting renovated. Another one was your alma mater, FAMU. Hospital there, I think around 1911 it was opened. My mom was actually a nurse and tried to get into some of the schools here. And FAMU was one of the schools that she attempted to get into. She didn't, but eventually went to Philadelphia and became a nurse. But it's amazing to see, again, people feeling a need. This woman who's a nurse said, there's no hospitals in Gainesville, so guess what? I'm going to turn my house into a hospital for Blacks. I mean, this forethought that these individuals had, it's just remarkable. And
again, the neighborhood we're in, even Sugar Hill, which was next to this neighborhood, and this neighborhood grew out of that. Sugar Hill was anchored by Brewster, and that former Brewster, when it closed in 1966, became Methodist, and Methodist eventually merged into what was University. And now all of that is UF Health Jacksonville, which is right down the streets. So we're sitting in a neighborhood that the legacy of the individuals you've talked about, the A.L. Lewis's, even some people, other local people here. Oh, you mentioned the former Bishop. My mind's putting blank on it. Henry Tooks. I should know that, right? So Bishop Henry Tooks, his house, the AKA house, is right down the street and what was in the middle of Sugar Hill. Those individuals. And what they contributed in terms of insurance, healthcare, laid the foundation for the community that's here today. So, speaking in terms of community, A lot of things have changed in these communities since that time. This is something I've always heard from my parents, who grew up during segregation and graduated from all black school, and their kind of interpretation of what their community is today versus what it was then. So I want to kind of focus on some of the communities that these houses are in, because many of these communities are struggling today economically. So in your opinion, what are some things that we can do to preserve not only these houses that remain, but also potentially help revitalize some of these communities? And I know I'm throwing some planning stuff here, but I can't help myself. So.
I know, it's amazing. So advocacy, working to make sure our communities are still here and strong. Encouraging individuals to buy property in the area, so that those stories are held and told. Also helping to get historical designation and historical markers. Those will give you an opportunity to really get the true stories out there, not just the Wikipedia stories. I always go to that because people love to quote Wikipedia, and I'm like, there's not a primary source. You have to go get some of these primary sources. And so those historical marker and designation, as you know as a planner, are so important because they require you to have that full knowledge and history, accurate history of that place or that site in order to get the historical marker. Investing into the community, just like all these individuals we've talked about today. They bought property, they made develop opportunities for individuals to do that. Also investing in the community and buying it as commercial usage, an opportunity for there to be dollars back into the community by owning a business or a home that can be used for mixed use. All those things will just ensure that our communities are here and stay safe and have longevity of our history.
So I'm going to throw some planning stuff because I got an audience in the room. You mentioned two very important things from a planning perspective that is very economically significant in redevelopment of historic, minority and historically excluded communities. One was the historic designation. So the historic designation, especially like a National Register historic designation versus a local historic designation. Local historic designations tend to come with criteria at the local level that can displace people because it forces you to restore a structure a certain type of way. On the other hand, the National Register designation does not come with that type of teeth on the property owner, but it takes that history and exposes that history. And once you're designated as a National Register Historic District, it does something that's very important in a historically excluded community, which is, I was always taught, access to information is power. Mm-hmm. There may be historic sites within your community that is historic, but nobody else does. And you could drive down the street one day, Brewster, great example. Mm-hmm. When I 10 years ago, the Brewster Hospital that was located on Jefferson Street, which is where the VA clinic is at today. Mm-hmm. I'm out taking pictures, and half the building's being knocked down. I'm like, what are you doing? Because it was a historic structure, but it wasn't legally protected as a historic structure. It means it had no more protection than a Family Dollar. So that history was lost. But when you designate as a National Register Historic District, it means to get that demo permit, they have the person who wants to tear that building down has to go before the Historic Preservation Commission, and there's a public meeting for that. Mm-hmm. And when the community is made aware of that, it gives the community an opportunity. Now you have a voice to go advocate for that history, which could save some of those buildings. And then from an economic piece, when you are a contributing structure within a National Register historic district, it basically means if you have an income producing property, you can get tax credits. That's money. So you can get tax credits for the redevelopment of the property. Or if you have a nonprofit within that area, that means you can apply for certain types of grants with the National Park Service. So that struggling church that grandma went to, that maybe the collection's not coming in the collection plate the same, and that roof needs to be replaced, it's an opportunity for the community to respond that way. And then the zoning part, zoning, redlining, you mentioned that. Neighborhoods the neighborhoods look the way they look today because it was intentional. And a lot of the zoning is a part of that. So now that we know that, we can change that zone to be more culturally appropriate. So I know we're getting close to the end, so I got one more question for you.
Okay.
And this is more, I know we talked a lot about the past, but here I want to talk about like the future. Okay. Because I'm looking at your beautiful family here and the three young ones here. Yeah. And you're a living legacy of your parents, your grandmother, the Bethune Circle, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, and you're passing that on to this future generation. So is there anything that you want young people from the community to take from the work that you put into this book? And if so, what would that be?
Know your history. Know your history. Study your history. Understand who you are, where you came from, and talk to your grandparents and your parents and record them, because that is an oral history collection. You're collecting the history of them. Also, visit historical sites, homes, museums. All my kids know I love museums. I love historical sites. So when we land in a new city, they know Mommy's taking us to a museum, to a historical site, to a historical home. Those things I'm planting in my kids, they're going to remember that, and they're going to be able to tell their children and leave that legacy. And also knowing, again, that accurate, true history. And I keep driving that home because I'm in the middle of the master's program at Jackson State University, and I'm learning so much about really using those primary sources. Understanding the places that you spoke about, Florida memory, which I got a lot of pictures from there. Understanding the true history, because anyone can write anything on the internet these days. But you understanding and knowing your history, talking to your elders, talking to people in the community, knowing those things, being an advocate, researching, understanding, so that these communities can be preserved, these houses can be preserved, and we can understand who we are so we know exactly where we're going.
Now, I really want to stress that as we go into our Q&A. I'm just going to back you on the speaking to the elders part. From my research, and I remember just, growing up, I mean, the first family reunion we had was back in the mid-'80s. And there were things, so many questions I have now, that there were people in the mid-'80s that were there who knew that stuff, and they're no longer here. Yeah. So I know with my parents in their late 70s, like, I'm like a sponge around them now, because my dad's the oldest Davis around, so he remembers stuff that is great looking at Wikipedia and looking in books, but it's something else when that person can tell you exactly what it was, what the neighborhood smelled like. Yeah, I mean, just those things are treasurable. So if you have a chance to record family members, please do. Yeah. So I'm going to turn it back over, and we're going to go into Q&A.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Hasn't it been fantastic? Yes. Round of applause for both of them. Thank you. So as Ennis said, we are ready to take questions. So if you're in person with us, under your chair is a little clipboard. If you want to write a question, I'll come around and grab it from you. For our folks on Zoom, don't forget, put it in the chat. We'll transcribe it and get the question up here to them. And we'll do 3 more questions.
And so while we wait for your questions, I'm just going to throw you another question.
Okay.
We're not going to sit in like awkward silence and just wait for people to fill out stuff. So, what have you? And then you grew up here in Jacksonville, and now you've done a significant amount of research. What have you learned about the community here that you did not know originally before you started this journey?
The rich history. I mean, Sugar Hill probably stood out the most to me. Again, I used to go through this neighborhood all the time, and I just didn't know, all these prominent blacks lived in that area. A lot about Edward Waters College. My aunt and uncle actually attended Edward Waters College. And I always knew, because I grew up fourth generation AME, that they owned, the school and started the school, but didn't know that the president lived in that neighborhood. Bishop Tooks, he was a chancellor, making sure that, they had buildings and construction was done to improve. Those things I just did not know, and I think we've talked about this before over the years, how Jacksonville just has this rich history, and I gained such an appreciation for my hometown. Like I tell people, I literally have fallen in love with Florida Black history, and really Jacksonville too.
So we are a Wildcat and a Rattler sitting up here, but I do want to give the heads up and some shout out to EWU now.
Yes.
Because that is the oldest HBCU in the state of Florida. Mm-hmm. And it's right down the street.
Yeah.
So we have a question here. All right, let's see. This is to both of us, but I'm going to throw this to you.
Okay.
Is there any plan for a tour of Black historical homes in Jacksonville?
Wow.
Well, I've taken the tours that you led, like the East Side, and it was so educational for me. And so now to see it, like I could read the book and then
Yeah.
show me. So.
It sounds like me and Ennis needs to collaborate. And
Yeah, you need to do a tour. Yeah.
No, no. Collaboration. Collaboration. This is something it was another event, and it came up before. People are very interested in this tour of all these sites and homes. So this is like the third time in it, so I think we need to talk later and figure this out. I would love to be able to do something like that, because people come up to me and they say, oh, I want to go to the site. And I put in the book, like, don't just go to someone's house, because some of these houses are owned privately. You can't just go to their homes. But a lot of them are open. For instance, on the cover here is Dr. Mayor McLeod Bethune's home, which is located on the campus of Bethune-Cookman. I actually worked in this house for several years while I attended Bethune-Cookman. And so when I located this picture at the Library of Congress, I was like, I have to have this book on the cover. And so I don't get to make the final decision from the publisher. I had to go and plead my case. So I kind of sent them like other pictures that weren't that great, and then sent this one and was like, and just told the story. Like, I literally walked on campus at the age of 16, did a tour in his house, and said, I'm gonna work in that house. And when I got to Bethune-Cookman, my first year of college, first day of school, I walked over to the house and said, I wanna work here, and you don't have to pay me. I kept going, and the president at the time, his wife was running the house, the curator, Helen Bronson, who unfortunately has passed away. She tells the story where I just kept coming and they kept letting me stay. And so that is where I truly feel like my beginnings of my career started. And so it was so befitting to have, Dr. Mayor McLeod Bethune on the cover in the house that I worked in. And so once the pandemic kind of, slowed down, we came to Florida, and the first stop I did was go there, because to be able to stand on these grounds was just remarkable. So Ennis, we got to collaborate to make this tour.
Right, we'll do that. We'll do that. I want to go on this tour. So
me too.
All right, so we have 3 more cards, but these are a total of like 5 different questions.
Okay.
So I'm going to start off with question number 1, and we talked about the question is, were there many Black churches in the Sugar Hill, Durkeeville area, and are they still functioning?
Now, I didn't research a lot about churches, and you may be able to help me answer this. I do know that there are several churches that are here and that are still operating. I can't remember all the names because I'm bad with names, but I think pretty much it's Mount Ariat Baptist Church over here.
Across the street.
Across the street. Okay. See, I remember. So several churches that here. Also, the church that I actually attended growing up was New Hope AME Church, which is on Davis Street. Very small church. I mean, small. And it's funny, it made me remember my grandmother, who I credit as my first historian. When I was probably 10, maybe 12, for some reason she was tasked with getting the church history together. And she did. And I remember me helping her like tape pictures to the wall, one when they were celebrating the church history. And so I realized now as an adult, like my grandmother was actually planting those seeds, you know, to the museum work, to the history, to all of it.
Your future was sealed.
It was. It was.
And she's mentioned like two very important churches, not only in terms of local history, but national Black history. So New Hope, Davis Street.
Yeah.
So that was actually established by the father of A. Philip Randolph. And if I hope everybody here knows who A. Philip Randolph is, because sometimes I get in groups they don't know that. So that was right on Davis Street, Mount Ararat Baptist back in 1961. Dr. Martin Luther King actually spoke at that church and encouraged the local Black community to actually run for political office here to change things. And then there's another one right corner across this intersection that we're on. It used to be St. Paul AME, and that was a church that was built by a Black architect, which you don't really hear about, but James Edward Hutchins back in the 40s constructed that church. But a lot of the civil rights era, here I know we hear about Axe Handle Saturday, but that story is normally told from where violence took place. But really the organization behind that movement took place in African American churches. And so Mount Ararat, St. Paul, AME, New Hope, those were areas where people actually planned to change society. Mm-hmm. And we're living today in a society as a result of that activism. All right, so we're going to keep on with the questions here, and we're going to have two questions about Brewster Hospital. All right, so this one, and I don't know if your book may have covered this one, so we'll see.
Okay.
Can you talk a bit about the nursing school that was associated with Brewster Hospital and the impact that had on the neighborhood? And she also wants to know, where is this building, the Brewster, that they're preserving? What neighborhood is located in?
So I think the building's in downtown, if I'm not mistaken, that is there. Now, I don't have a lot of research about Brewster Hospital. I can say that it was very popular, so popular that my mother was very interested in being, a nurse and being in this area. And I said my grandmother worked there at some point. So it was a pretty good teaching hospital from my understanding. Unfortunately, my mother, back then she had a heart condition. And the story that I was told was that because of her heart condition, they were concerned when she got to clinicals and had to see blood that she may pass out or something. And unfortunately, she was never able to get into nursing school in Florida and ended up moving to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where she became a nurse. And then I came to Florida and my grandmother raised me and all this stuff. But Brewster Hospital, I know, was very popular. Again, a place where Blacks were only able to be, seen, but a great teaching hospital for sure.
Yeah, I'll throw in a little bit on Brewster. I did research on that for UF Health about a year or two ago. Brewster founded in 1901. The original location is in La Villa, which is a part of downtown. But that's probably, I would say, one of the oldest urban Gullah Geechee communities in the state of Florida. I'm a Gullah Geechee descendant, so if you don't know what that is, I can't explain that, but I can explain it more. But so there you go. But the original Brewster is still there. Actually, the building was constructed in 1885. Actually, Brewster was founded in 1885. The nursing school grew out of that around 1901. They eventually ended up in Sugar Hill by 1931. And then Sugar Hill really became a medical district, if you want to call it that. You had Brewster, you had Duval County Hospital at that point in time, and another one I think was St. Luke's. All kind of straddling Hogan's Creek, which was really the racial demarcation line between black and white. And Sugar Hill, and many of these wealthy individuals that Jada's covered in her book, they were affiliated with Brewster. They either gave money to keep it operating, and there are a lot of physicians and doctors who lived in this area who were associated with A. Philip Randolph and Dr. Eartha White and other significant individuals in the community that built what we're sitting in today. this library here, which Dallas Graham, I guess actually you trace the history back, it was the first branch library built in the library system here. And the original location was taken out by Interstate 95, but this library is here because of, you can take it back to Brewster if you want to, because Sugar Hill really grew around that, and it built the middle class base of attorneys and doctors and physicians and people involved in the insurance industry.
This is why, Ennis, we need to do this tour.
So we got 2 more questions here, and if we have any more, while you bring that up, I'll just go ahead and get started on these 2. So thank you for this opportunity to learn more about your research. Question number 1 is, what are some future projects that you plan on working on? Actually, I'm going to take them just one at a time. Okay. So question number 1 is, what are some future projects that you plan on working on?
So again, I fall in love with Florida Black history. I am really diving into the area that I'm in Tampa. I'm getting ready to work on a project with my sorority. So it's gonna in Tampa, and so I'm getting ready to do some research. I've already started doing some research, and I was telling my husband, he's like, "Is that part of your schoolwork, or you just?" But I love it, so I'm doing that. I have aspirations of doing more books right now. Again, I'm just in love with Florida Black history, and so I'm going to see where that takes me. I would love to, do more books. I love the history, and so we'll see what happens.
All right, question number 2, and I can't wait for that Tampa book. So, question number 2. Will you talk about some of the African American museums in Florida that you're familiar with?
Wow, so many. I've talked about Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune's house, which is a historical house museum that you can visit. Also, where I just relocated to Tampa, there's the Carter G. Woodson African American Museum in St. Pete. They're doing great things, and they were awarded some money, and I think getting ready to renovate and do more. The D.L. Dorsey house in Miami, Dorsey's house is in the book. That is also open and part of the Black Archives and Lyrical Theater there. Several other, another house is the Spady Cultural Center, which is a house that was owned by a man named Spady. And that place is also open for you to visit. It's a cultural center, and there's another house next to it. So several places. And it's talked about the Ritz Theater here in Jacksonville, which is amazing. I had to take my kids because when I went for the first time, I found out my great-grandfather's photo is up in the house, in the museum. He was part owner of the Jacksonville Bears, which was a team, and he also was an entertainment promoter. So much history here.
Chitlin Circuit?
Huh?
So Chitlin Circuit.
Yeah. So a lot of institutions, a lot of historical sites. Definitely the HBCUs. FAMU has a lot of history. I recently found out this Black History Month, I spotlighted a lot of stuff. Oh gosh, here we go. And of course, my institution, Bethune-Cookman, has some historical sites on campus as well. But yeah, and you got on green. Look at this.
Yes, I do have green, and I have a mask that's orange. So yes, that was intentional. So got one more question here. Before I do that, there's another museum not too far away at the Clara White Mission. Eartha White, who ran the Clara White Mission, when she passed in 1974, she actually lived on the second floor. And that has basically been preserved as a free house museum. So the furniture where her contemporaries, Booker T. Washington, A. Philip Randolph, when he left and came back to town, or James Weldon Johnson, the furniture, the beds they slept in, it's still there. That's where Ray Charles got to start before he left here in 1945 at the the Black Musicians Union on the third floor. There's musicians who are affiliated with Duke Ellington that's donated their instruments to that museum. So it's a free one, not too far away. That's one you should check out too as well. So here we got our last question, and this is going to like put us perfectly like at 2 p.m. So, do you know a source that lists many of the original Black businessmen and women in Jacksonville?
I don't. If I had to go and do a stretch, I would say some of the Black historical newspapers will probably have a listing. Probably the Florida Star, which was a popular Black newspaper. I remember my grandmother was adamant about putting me in the Florida Star for something. I can't remember what it was. But our Black newspapers really are great research. I'm working on a paper now. At my studies with Jackson State University, and it's pretty much based around Black historical newspapers. It's actually about Mary McLeod Bethune and the house and her turning it into a foundation. And I have like 15 articles from the Chicago Defender where she wrote and was written about. Our Black historical newspapers are really great resources. I would start there. And it's talked about some of the different special collections, Jacksonville Public Library here. Also, Eartha White collection was very resourceful for me. So those places, those archives and those special collections are really would be a great resource.
And two of those I want to highlight as we close is the Black papers again. If we go back to a period in time where it was separate but unequal, the local papers here didn't cover Black news. So you have to learn about local Black history from newspaper archives such as the Chicago Defender or the Pittsburgh Courier. Defender is very interesting because one of the columnists for the Defender was Walter Barnes. Walter Barnes was a swing musician who in the 1930s established his southern headquarters in La Villa. And the network that he would use to take his band around the South became known as the Chitlin Circuit after his death. So the Chitlin Circuit is actually tied into this area, and we don't even talk about that. But you would learn about that from the Chicago Defender. The first documented recording, first documented live performance of the blues took place on Ashley Street and Broad Street in 1910. You learn about that from the Pittsburgh Courier because they actually recorded and talked about it. We didn't talk about that here. And then you mentioned Eartha White. If you just Google like
Eartha White.
Actually, the Crisis, we didn't even mention that, but the Crisis, the NAACP, they have Googled 1942 Jacksonville Crisis. Mm-hmm. And it's a whole edition of 1942 that talks about Black business community, actually the Black community in general, pictures and everything. Mm-hmm. Some of your pictures, I think, may have come from that.
Yeah.
And then Eartha White used to publish a Black business community list. So that Eartha White collection has that list that you can look people's addresses up, their names, what their occupations were. Very helpful research resources. So she hit on some excellent.
The census data, my husband.
Another great spot.
Yeah.
Census data. That's great. That's great information as well. So I know we are right at 2:00.